And with me now is Joe Moreno. Joe is a Republican strategist who's also one of our regular Context panelists. Good to have you with us in the studio here in London rather than Washington today, Joe. The big overarching question, I guess, about today's talks is whether that will actually bring Russia's war in Ukraine closer to being over. I wonder what your thoughts are based on what you've heard and seen from those leaders today, especially given at the weekend we heard about the US security strategy, which suggested that Europe was being unrealistic in its expectations about how this war might come to an end.
Anita, the feeling very strongly in Washington is that there is really a desperation to get a deal done, that America does not really have the appetite to continue either, certainly not direct involvement, and even the financial involvement of providing weapons. People are really kind of over that, and they just want to see peace. Now, the 20-point plan, it's a step in the right direction from the 28-point plan, which had some really, really anti-Ukrainian points in it. The things that stuck out to me, a cap on the Ukrainian military. The inability of the Ukraine to join NATO in the future, and of course the territorial relinquishment, more land than Russia had even occupied. So hopefully those three things are kind of cut down, but they are real just impositions on Ukraine's sovereignty. So I hope we're going in the right direction here, and we're not just moving toward expediency.
Do you think this is just too big for President Trump to walk away from, given that it was one of the first topics that he talked about really in terms of trying to sort out the war? Or could we be in a situation where he does actually lose patience with this process and issues an ultimatum which the sides have to accept?
I mean, you could see that happening. Now, my biggest concern, not only is it an expedient deal that might not be the best one for Ukraine, China's watching us, right? China wants to see very closely how the U.S. would respond to an invasion of Taiwan. And if we back off this, if we kind of throw up our hands and say, you know what, enough is enough, we've lost patience, we don't want to go any further, it's this or nothing, China's watching. And so you have to make a good deal, not just for Ukraine, but for America.
Is the administration joining the dots in the way that you describe?
You know, you have to wonder, the administration is a little erratic, right? Donald Trump is not necessarily known for consistency. So he pushes a deal, then he kind of takes it back. He kind of, makes kind of a slur at Zelensky saying he didn't read the plan, which obviously is pretty snarky. So we hope that there's a longer term strategy here, but right now it seems kind of erratic.
How do the Europeans keep President Trump on board then, especially if Russia is tempting him with future business deals, as we've been hearing and reading about?
They maintain their military budgets, right, which have been increased in recent years and basically show that their contribution to NATO is serious. And they promise to get more involved. And I think that the U.S., again, it does not want to continue.
They have been doing that, though, haven't they?
Yes, but America's looking for that. Right? So I think that's how you assure the Trump administration that if Russia basically turns, if Russia reneges on its promises, and let's face it, President Putin often does. I think the U.S. wants to know if they're going to go, arms locked with this whole thing, that Europe will stand up and the U.S. won't be basically left having to get re-involved because Zelensky once again is in trouble.
But is the U.S. moving the goalposts? It said, obviously, increase your military budgets, etc. Europe has responded to that. They're saying they will go further. And then President Trump introduced this idea of actually, well, maybe I might like to do some business deals with Russia.
So people are very split about the injection of business with military and national security strategy. So Donald Trump likes that. Remember, he's a business guy. He was elected on the fact that he knows real estate. He knows finance. People are kind of turned off a little bit while they're involving that sort of thing. Some folks think it's great because it gives us a financial stake and not just a military one. Others feel like it has no place in foreign policy. So for me personally, I don't mind it as long as it doesn't give the perception that there's financial benefits being put over the national security ones of Ukraine.
We've seen him by turn be critical of Ukraine and then of Russia and back again and so on and so on. In terms of your instinct, Joe, where do you think President Trump will land on this question of who ultimately he backs?
I hope it's Ukraine. I really hope that he doesn't put the efficiency and the speediness of a deal above what's best for Ukraine and what's best for America. Because short term, it might be great to get it over with, but long term, Russia, China, North Korea, they're watching what happens here. And if America doesn't have the stomach to really stand up for a good deal for Ukraine, others will think we're going to be wobbly in the future.
OK, Joe, very good to get your thoughts on that story. You're staying with us to talk about another story in a few minutes. For the moment, thank you very much. Now, the US Supreme Court has been hearing arguments in a case which could shift a huge amount of power away from Congress to President Trump. The case arose from President Trump's decision to fire Rebecca Slaughter from her job at the Federal Trade Commission, despite a federal law that limits the removal of a commissioner to very specific circumstances, including inefficiency and neglect of duty. The Supreme Court will decide whether or not to overturn a 90-year-old ruling which allows Congress to shield members of independent agencies from being removed at the will of the president. And with me again is Joe Moreno, still in the studio with us. Joe, thank you very much for talking to us about this case as well today. Just first of all, in layperson's terms, tell us a little bit more about what this case involves.
Sure, Anita. Well, the case is actually not really about Donald Trump, although he has instigated it. It's actually a debate that's been going on for over 90 years, and it goes to the very separation of powers as to how our government functions. There's three branches, right? There's Congress that writes the law, there's the executive that enforces the law, and then there's the judiciary that interprets the law. So now, for the big agencies we think of, defense, Treasury, right? Justice. They are controlled top to bottom by the president, right? From the cabinet member all the way down to the bottom. The president decides who serves, when they serve, and can remove them for any reason. Then you have this body of regulatory independent agencies. Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Reserve, Securities and Exchange Commission. They've been set up by Congress with some more structure there. Basically, the commissioners that are installed have terms. And to your point, the president can only remove those individuals under certain circumstances, basically for cause. So take a step back. Now, the president will say, how can I be the sole enforcer of the laws if I can't control the individuals who run these agencies that actually help enforce the laws? Could be commissioners from a prior president, could be commissioners from the president of a different party even. So Donald Trump has brought this issue to a head by saying, I cannot, under Article 2 of the Constitution, be the sole enforcer of the laws if I can't control who actually runs these agencies.
But the system is designed to give balance, isn't it, to protect from too much power being given to one part of that, those branches of government. So do you have concerns about this case?
Well, so the Supreme Court has actually ruled completely differently. In the 1920s, they found these institutions to be unconstitutional, right? For the very narrow reading that executive power comes out of Article 2, and therefore the president has to control who enforces the laws. 1935, the court unanimously held the opposite way against President Roosevelt, saying these are legitimate constructs. Congress creates them, Congress funds them, and to your point, to avoid partisanship, to avoid too much power, these are appropriate institutions. Now, fast forward to 2025, Donald Trump, of course, the instigator of many things, he says, nope, I want to go back to pre-1935. I should have control of these agencies.
Yeah, I mean, people may be concerned, whether they try to take a pretty neutral approach to this or whether they are Democrats. They may be concerned that this is part of a pattern from President Trump. He is getting those conservative justices on the Supreme Court who are in a majority to overrule the liberal judges, to overrule the decisions of lower courts. He's done it, for example, with redrawing electoral maps, and now he's trying to do it in this instance, these organizations set up by Congress to be shielded from presidential interference, if you like. Is this all about a power grab and control for President Trump?
Of course. He's the most aggressive president in terms of executive power for decades, maybe even a century, right? He has basically installed loyalists in his cabinet agencies. He wants complete control of these agencies. And people have to think about it, not just short term, not just tactically, but how does it affect Donald Trump? How does it affect the presidency? And do we want more checks and balances? Congress has already kind of receded in its power and its oversight of things. This is one of those last mechanisms they have to have some more input into who controls these agencies. Take away that input, it really just resides with the White House.
And, in terms of what voters make of this, Joe, do they care about this? Are they interested in this? When we look at President Trump's base, we often talk on the program, looking ahead to the midterm elections next year and ask how one thing or another might affect the way voters act. Do they care about this?
I think they care if you feel strongly for or against President Trump. I think it's political. If you like Donald Trump, you're perfectly happy with him having more power. If you don't like Donald Trump, you want checks and balances. I think Americans tend to look at this very short term. I would rather they take a step back and say it's not just so much about the next 2 or 4 or 8 years. It's about how do we want our government to function? Do we like these checks and balances? Do we like Congress to have more input in who runs these agencies, less politics, less partisanship? Or are we okay with centralizing even more power with the president?
Joe, thank you so much. Joe Moreno.